welcome to our webinar on Portuguese-American literature. Today, we're very happy to actually present an event that was scheduled to happen in the week a year ago, the week everything closed down. It was the first event we had to cancel. Our friend Chris Lakoff had organized it all for us. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us and able to join us. We would really like to dedicate this event to him and to his memory and to his lasting benefits to Portuguese-American literature. His work will be forever imprinted in Portuguese-American literature, literary production. Wherever he is with us, I'm sure, because he was so excited about having this event at his alma mater at Berkeley. And we were so happy to be able to work with him, and we still are. So in his honor, we have the 3 guests we had planned to have on that day, and we will have this event, and we're very grateful that you can join us. It took us a year to get up the courage to put it back together again. And when I say the courage, that is what I really mean. But here we are because he would want us to be. Thank you all for joining us as well. I now pass it to Duarte, who will do the official introductions and will be running a portion of the event. We'll try to do the dog and pony show as best as we can. And hopefully you will enjoy this event, which I know will be a great event because the guests are outstanding. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Deolinda. I'll be very briefly then. I would like to welcome and thank all our guests and Deolinda as well for being here today and your presence. I'm going to be very briefly with the biographies because most of you already know our guests. So I'll read and then we'll start the event with a general question to our guests and then more specific questions afterwards. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put it on the chat and we'll start then with the biography. So Millicent, let's start with Millicent Borges Accardi, is a Portuguese-American writer. Is the author of 2 poetry books, Only More So, Salmon Poetry, Enduring Eternity, and a chapbook, Woman on a Shaky Canto Mundo, California Arts Council, YADO, from the San Luis Americana, Barbara Deming Foundation, Money for Women, and a grant from the Foundation of Contemporary Arts, COVID-19, Fund 2.0. She lives in Topanga, California, and holds degrees in writing and literature from CSULB and USC. Recent poems in New American Writing, The Journal, TAB, and other Chicago magazine. She also has her nonfiction, including over 50 interviews with Luso writers and artists. She appears in the Writers' Chronicle, Poets Quarterly, and Portuguese-American Journal. Fellowship also include archival research into the works of the writer Kay Boyle and the Formby Foundation Special Collections Library at Texas Tech, and the John Crow Ransom Nimrod Writers Conference in Tulsa. Rhode Island College, Massachusetts, notable feature readings at the University of California at Riverside, Brown University, Rutgers, UMass Dartmouth, AWP conferences, and the Carey series at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. She founded a popular Kale Soup for the Soul, I think we all know, reading series featuring Portuguese-American writers reading work about family, food, and Luso culture, and co-curates the Los Angeles Loose Lips literary series sponsored by poets, writers, and Topanga County Library. Thank you for joining us, Millicent. And this, then another guest is Lara Gularte. Lara Gulaarte's book of poetry, Kissing the Bee, was published the Bitter Olander Press in 2018. She's the poet laureate of for El Dorado Country in, from July 21st to through 23rd. Nominated for several pushcart prizes, Gularte has been published in national and international journals and anthologies. Her poetry depicting her Açorian heritage is included in the Gavia Brown Book of Portuguese-American Poetry. She's affiliated with the Cagaro Colloquium, Azorian University, Azorian University of Fresno. Azorian Diaspora Writers and the Portuguese Beyond the Borders Institute, California State University of Fresno. That's the correct. In 2017, Gularte traveled to Cuba with a delegation of American poets and presented poetry at the Festival Internacional Poesia de La Habana. She's a proud member of the esteemed Escritores del Nuevo Sol. Gularte is a creative writing instructor for California Transformative Arts at Mule Creek Prison. And thank you for joining us, Lara, as well. And also our third special guest, we all know as well. His name is Frank Gaspar, of Azorian descendant, Pico in San Miguel, was born and raised in the old Portuguese West End of Provincetown, Massachusetts, a graduate of MFA program in writing at the University of California, Irvine, and is the author of 5 collections of poetry and 2 novels. Among his many awards are the Morse, Anhinga, and Brittingham Prizes for poetry, multiple inclusions in the Best American Poetry for Pushcart Prizes, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Literature, and the California Arts Council Fellowship in Poetry. His debut novel, Living Pico, was a Barnes & Noble Discovery Prize winner, a recipient of the California Book Award for First Fiction, and a New York Times Noteworthy in Paperback Selection. His second novel, Stealing Fatima, was a Mass Book of the Year in Fiction, Massachusetts Foundation for the book. His work has appeared widely in magazines and literary journals, including The New Yorker, The Nation, The Harvard Review, The American Poetry Review, and others. He has held the LU and Amelia Pedrosa Luso American Foundation Endowed Chair at the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth, and more recently was named the Farrell A. Sams Distinguished Chair Writer in Residence at Mercer University. He currently teaches in the graduate writing program at Pacific University, Oregon. His latest publication is the Poems of Renata Ferreira, pastiche of memoir, fiction, and poetry, which begins in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and ends in Lisbon with the Carnation Revolution. We'll for sure talk about the Carnation Revolution, but first of all, I would like to thank all our 3 guests for being present, and I'll pass the word to Deolinda so she can do the first question. You're mute, Deolinda.
Sorry. So my first question is really a general question, and it applies to the 3 of you, because all of you know that I think all of you know this, that I am not particularly fond of subdividing and sub-denominating literature in little cubicles. I think literary production is universal, and it's all part. Everybody's producing in that within that realm. However, many of you have been labeled as Portuguese-American writers, basically because you write and you are of Portuguese descent. So my question does not at all want to place your literary work in any particular box, but I would like to ask, how do each of you feel that being of a particular ethnic group, in this case Portuguese, has shown through your writing, or how have you worked, how have you felt the need to work it through your writing? And we can start with any one of you. So let's start with Lara. Let's have girl, boy, girl. So.
Did you say me?
Yes, I said.
Oh, okay. I get to be first. Yeah, I have to say that as far as being Portuguese for me and my writing, that's what got me to write. Recently, I don't know if you know, Al Young, who was our poet laureate in California, passed away. And he was basically a teacher and mentor of mine when I started writing poetry. And I must thank him for that. And one of the things he kept impressing me with me was write about your heritage, write about your heritage. And it was important for me. I was the oldest of many children growing up because I'm about the 5th or 6th generation in California from the Azores. And so because I was the oldest, I was in between the kids and the adults kind of. And so I had more information and more cultural interaction with all that is the Azorians in California. And I already had a rich wealth of words I could bring forth. And then it also meant for me to find out about my ancestors and how they came to be here, and stories from the old ones, from the Azores. And I didn't speak Portuguese because I was so down the road in the generations that by the time I came along, it wasn't spoken in my household, although my parents couldn't speak English when they started school. But going after that legacy and finding out things, and that's what got me writing my book, Kissing the Bee, and informed what I was writing about. And it was very enriching. And I was the first in my family to go back to the islands where we had come from. And that was, again, very rewarding. So it was wonderful. It was enriching for my life in writing. And in my book, Kissing the Bee, which was published by the Bitter Oleander, I have to say also thank you to Frank Gaspar, because he was the first editor of this book. So thank you, Frank. I wanted to thank you in person. I'm still not in person, but this is as close as I can get right now. And with that, I will pass the wand to someone else.
I think it's the same question for Frank, I believe, Deolinda, right?
Yes, I'm sorry. I unmute myself because of the planes. So yes, Frank is next.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I don't know how to begin. I like the others. I grew up in a Portuguese community, and it was Provincetown is an interesting place in and of itself because it's the tip of Cape Cod, and Thoreau walked out there and all that. But our town was Portuguese. After World War II, every single selectman, they were all men, was Portuguese. The town was pretty much run by the Portuguese. It wasn't pretty much, it was run by, we were Portuguese. And I didn't know anything else. I mean, in the outside world came to us in the summer because it was a vacation place. And so we would see these really marvelous, exotic people show up and live with us for 3 months and then disappear again, like a wave coming in and out. What that did is, for me, is it emphasized how different we were. We were not like other people. And so when I began writing, the image I have, I'm lying on the couch and I'm writing poems. And I'm not consciously writing poems about being Portuguese. I'm just writing about growing up and memories and the people around me. And it wasn't until after that first book, The Holyoke, was published that people kind of noticed that it seemed to be about Portuguese people in the Portuguese community. But it was all I knew. And I'll cut very quickly to the next phase. When I got out into the world, it took me a long time to get into college. I have a very spotted history, but I never read a book by a Portuguese author in any of the 3 institutions that I attended. And neither did anyone else. I couldn't find it. I wanted to take Portuguese when I was at Cal State Long Beach. It wasn't offered. And so I started to get this chip on my shoulder, and I thought, wait a minute, this is not right. And so I became more maybe aggressively Portuguese-American in my writing, because I felt that I came from a background that needed to be heard. That being said, I was in complete ignorance of Portuguese in California, really. The only thing I had heard of was the tuna fleet in San Diego. And of course, there's this vast population of the dairy farms and all that kind of stuff, Catherine's background and so forth. So gradually, I came to meet all these other wonderful people, and all of you, some of you whom I've not met personally, but there is an actual community of Portuguese-American writers and thinkers and teachers and so forth. This has been a wonderful opening for me, but I was really scrapping when I started writing. I thought, we have to be heard. Where are we? You know, that kind of thing. And that's I'll stop there.
So we will turn to Millicent, and it will be the same question to Millicent as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this, and blessings to Chris Larkosh and his memory. I always thought, I think of writing as sort of a way to communicate and also to problem solve. And so that's kind of how I treat writing. It's a way to communicate and connect with people and the world and to solve problems. And I think that whatever art form you're following, who you are, it comes through in the work, whether you like it or not. And so I think the whole idea of being in a Portuguese box or in a category or something, it comes through whether you're planning to do a feature or a book or not. And most of my work prior to fairly recently has not been quote unquote uniquely Portuguese, but it was when I got to know a bunch of other Portuguese-American writers that we noticed similarities in our writing, and we were sharing, and just sort of who you are and where you come from comes through. And I just want to say that it's like you almost can't deny it. And like Frank, I have ties to Long Beach, where I grew up, in Cal State Long Beach, and there weren't Portuguese classes. But when I was a kid, we did go to Artesia, and they had the bloodless.
Okay.
And I remember going to the Navigator, which was our Portuguese restaurant in San Pedro, and the picnics at Rec Park. They had Azorian picnics where they roped off a whole section in the park and everyone came. And so I had not Provincetown, but I had sort of the Long Beach unique experience of Portuguese. And I really was wanting to learn about my heritage, and writing was kind of a way to do it. In the last few years, I've been working on poems that are inspired by Portuguese poetry and Portuguese-American poetry and lines from that. And so I've been more consciously working with the Portuguese-ness and sort of more allowing it to come through.
So,
Thank you so much, all of you, for that introduction. We would like, for the benefit of those who are joining us, who may not have had the privilege of being acquainted with your work, we would like them to have a little taste of it. So we have asked that each of you could read a selected piece from your work. And again, we'll keep the same order, and we'll start with Lara, if that's okay with you. Okay, is that fine?
That's fine.
Will that work?
Sure. If you look at my background, you will see a beautiful landscape, and that's from Flores Island. which I recommend everyone visiting. And that is where my maternal grandfather was from. And in his honor, I will read Flores Island, the place at the beginning. A wail rises up in her mind, turning her thoughts gray. In port, the ferry of return, she searches for her grandfather to discover the shape of his immigration, and finds the planks gone, rotted. At the mercy of rough water and high winds, he rode, sinews pulling his dory, pulling his bones to breaking. She scans the distance, says his name out loud, Antonio Henriquez, waits to hear a voice, see a face. She searches for all the prisoners of thick mists, others who look like her, whose foreign tongues speak music to her soul. Beyond the wake of a rogue wave, currents and tides ride on the back of a gray whale. She sees through the vapor boats whose nets gather the sky and let go. Fog falls, bearing dazed souls back to their home place. She falls with them.
Thank you, Lara.
Wow, thank you, Lara. Thank
Yeah.
you. So, well, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Frank, I know it's a tough act to follow, and I feel sorry for Millicent, who will go at the very end of this, but I know she can handle it. So we'll now go to Frank.
I think Millicent is a wonderful choice for the crescendo at the end. She's got it all. I'm going to, if I can find it, I'll read a poem from, great. I'll read a poem from that Duarte mentioned. He wanted to hear Leather, 67. And this is a poem by Renata Ferreira, who is not me, but used me, I think, as a channel. This is written by her during the in the year before the, as far as I can tell, the year before the revolution took place, which was yesterday. Everybody watched the movie again yesterday, The Captains. I cried twice. Don't you see I never talked about anything except paradise? It's not the party or the unions, but I can no longer explain myself. It's like trying to dream in a language I've never heard. I don't mean dream like longing or need. Your face, Anactoria, when I told you how they questioned me. They kept me for 2 days. They watched me piss in a bucket. I said I needed the wind in the kitchen because it's the opposite of kiss. They took a valise of my translations, bills, inventories, orders, descriptions of propellers, hulls, rudders, complaints, marine glass, also my own receipts for this work. They found only legal. They tried to act like they knew something. 2 men who could only read the Portuguese parts. I'm supposed to be afraid now. When I write bulletins about the 3 Marias, I say they are entombed and still beaten, which is not necessarily the truth, but it translates well. Today they will go to France and Belgium, and then pamphlets will be picked up. You know who I mean. What else, love? I'm being careful, but all my air slips by too easily. Where does it go? It pitches me down a green corridor with lamps burning like little fevers. Do you see it's never enough? Your face when I told you became someone else's face, with the eyes of that woman who looks like leather and sits in the doorway of the bank and holds her hand out for coins when people walk by and try not to look at her.
Frank, I could not tell you in how many ways I identify with that poem. You may not know, but I moved here to the United States at 15, 2 months after being interrogated by the P. So I feel that poem in my bones.
You're wonderful. I mean, you're so heroic. I can't believe you got through that interrogation, and here you are, smiling.
It seemed normal. That's, for years I didn't even realize what it was. Because if you didn't do what they wanted, that's what happened. So it was, I have to say, it felt normal. And that's very strange, but I don't have any other words to describe it. It's just, yeah. And I'm just would like to make sure it didn't feel normal to anybody else again. And that poem is magnificent, and I thank you for it very, very much.
Thank you for that.
Millicent, I know you can come now, and you can do this. So please, could you please read a little piece of your work for us?
This is from the manuscript I'm working on, Through a Grainy Landscape. It's called, and that's the one inspired by Portuguese poetry and Portuguese-American poetry. This is called With Eyes That Bear the Widowhood of Days. The ceiling of the ocean floor is fat, with its tidal drop, a mere sandy slope, the barrenness now, a symbol, a lost meaning to catch. A rule that the Portuguese fisherwoman on the shore above can attest to, easily nodding in agreement that they are bound together like time. They have wagered and lost. A lifetime of fresh bets and new hands, grown old with uncertainty, a rule, a catch, a slip of the tongue, and the courtship will be over. Lost to sea journeys far away, from solid-footed Terceira, where black glue is the medicine of forgetting, and a pause is the known secret inside absence. And where love is a shy testament to hope, the thaw that every woman waiting here tempts with her own fate. On shore, they long to don sadness, like a dark shawl around their forearms. It is a uniform, encompassing wool, knitted halfway between loss and joy. The friendliest girls they used to be, these women now waiting on the land, reveal happiness, but with a slight mention or a holding note of the wind, softly reminding them of the men they used to love.
Thank you, Millicent. That was, again, magnificent and a great example. And I think that that's also a great example that we may live on land, and many of the Azorians, at least in California, live on land, but we still belong to the ocean. And generations afterwards, we're still ocean bound. We're still bound to that force that I think is part of being Portuguese. I can't think of it any other way. This is the time that we begin to invite questions. So anyone who would like to raise any questions, Duarte is going to do the next round but basically that can be interrupted at any time. You can either raise your hand if you wish to present your question verbally, or you can write it in the chat.
Thank you, Deolinda. So I'm going to change a little bit the order. I'm going to start with Millicent, and then Frank, and then Lara. For Millicent, I'm going to talk about a specific book and a specific poem, but I think this question can be applied to other poems, Millicent, as well. And my question is, many of your poems in the book, Only More So, are quite visual. For instance, the poem Portrait of a Girl, 1942, was based on the young Lucas photograph of Venduka Vogelova, taken a few hours before the young girl was transported to a concentration camp. The poem itself starts as, I am the mirror for the one who speaks, for one who speaks. Could you please develop a little bit more, Millicent, the relationship between image and word in your poetry? And if you want me to show the poem as well, I can show the poem as well. If you want to read, I would like to hear you developing a little bit more this visuality that we find often on your poems?
Sure. I can read the poem. I can talk to it as well. This was based on a photograph, and I'd found an old photograph of a young girl who was on her way to a concentration camp, and there were very few photographs taken during that time. And I was in Prague. I had a semester in Prague, and this photograph touched me. And so it was sort of an ekphrastic poem, and that I was writing on a piece of artwork, and it was the photograph. And I just couldn't stop looking at it. So the poem was an attempt to get inside the head of the young girl, and it's a black and white photo. And I was trying to sort of picture myself in her mind during that time and what she might feel and say. So I was trying to give words to that picture. And also I might add too that I did some research into it, and she was one of the lucky ones who survived. So I was not able to track her down, but I did find out that she made it through the concentration camp. So that's always brought me a little bit of comfort, since I wrote the poem and I just wasn't sure how it ended up. But it was sort of a way of me trying to connect to a feeling and an overall idea of the photograph, and to sort of capture it and translate it from a visual into a text.
Thank you, Millicent. My next question is going to be for Frank. And for Frank, I have, actually, I was inspired, so to speak, by his poem I just wrote. Stylistically speaking, your poems tend to be a little bit longer and prosaic, not in a negative way, of course, when I'm saying prosaic, than the ones, for instance, of Millicent and Lara. Do you consider your poems novelistic, or, if you want, prosaic? And if you think so, if you agree with the statement, what is your intention behind it?
I'm asked a lot about the long line,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember when I discovered it. I had a telescope out on the sidewalk, and a friend of mine, a poet from North Carolina, was staying with me out in California, and I remember I remember wanting to include a line by Milton about the heavens. Well, Milton, of course, wrote in iambic pentameter, so he has, five beats of iambic, but I wanted to include that in one of my lines, so I did, and of course the line got longer, and it was that moment, and I realized that I'm not bound by conventional line break, because the sound and the forward motion is there whether I break the line in a certain place or not. And so that's kind of how that came about. And I found that it was, it suited my breath when I read the poems and so forth. And just a few years ago, somebody was talking about line breaks, and she looked at me and she said, but Frank, your lines don't break, they just bend. and so there it is. So that's how I got there. I mean, it was maybe a technical thing at first, but when I realized making that adjustment just opened up a whole new world for me in terms of what I could do in a poem.
Thank you. Frank. And then a question for Lara. In her poetry, there is a close dynamic between nature itself and human nature. The reader, at least me as a reader, finds himself or herself in, I don't know if the word exists in English, but I said imagetic limbo, between nature and his own nature. Do you agree with this statement? And if you can explain a little bit more.
Yes, definitely agree with the statement. I feel like that we're all part of the natural world, and I just feel part of the natural world myself, and I can't help but write my poetry with something in the natural world a part of what I'm saying about myself or whatever statement I am making, because I feel that. And perhaps because I grew up in the very present natural world, and my family, we always lived in natural settings and ranches and so forth. So it's part of how I write and like to write.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if, thank you for your answer. I don't know if Deolinda wants to ask other questions. I have a little bit of questions. Go ahead, Deolinda.
I have a couple of questions, but one I would like to direct to Frank. And my question to him has to do with his voice and Renata's voice. And I would like to know how do you know, Frank, when it is Renata writing or speaking?
Well, that's a wonderful question. She's a very powerful force. I was out on the porch several years ago when I was working on a novel, and so at the end of it's in the afternoon or evening, suddenly this poem came out right in the middle of everything, and it was very strange. I thought, where did this come from? I don't know what this is. So I put it aside and so forth. To make a very long story short, that was the first time I heard her voice, and it was really different from mine. It turned out that first poem that came out, and these poems, Renata's poems, come out all at once. They, if I'm not there taking it down, it's gone. And I lost a lot of her poems. I was in the car one time and I was yelling at her, stop. She kept going, but it turned out.
You should know better than to yell at a woman to stop.
She's smarter and tougher than I am, especially. So
I didn't say that, you did.
But it turned out that poem was a poem about 4 or 5 poems from the end of her book, her collection, but I didn't know what it was. And then, another came and another came, and it was all very weird. And then gradually I understood that this was a woman named Renata, and she had been in Provincetown, she was in Lisbon. And when I got the chair down at Mercer, I was put up in an empty mansion. It was kind of dilapidated, but very beautiful inside, and they gave me a little room all by myself. And that's when she hit me. I mean, she was just mailing these things to me through my head. I'd get up at 3 a.m, there's a poem, and I'd take it down. So many of the poems were in that setting, and I was by myself. I wasn't, alone down there. And so I began to understand that she was a distinct person. She was not me. She did not write according to any of the poetic moves that I do or make.
She does not.
She's really a better poet than I am in a lot of ways. And I understood that I had to do something with it. So when I came back to California, I had all these poems. And so the only intervening that I did was I got a big door and I put her on saw horses. And I tried to find an arrangement for the poems. And certainly and I saw that they came randomly, but when I spread them out, I could see that they followed a certain arc. And so I just left them that way. And that was her.
So in a way, you became the channel for someone who could not speak at some point, and she found that voice through you. Do you feel that way at all?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. She's not me. And by the way, I tried to write like her. I want, because when I wanted to fill some things in, not a chance. I mean, it just doesn't work for me. I don't know what there is. She just, she kind of writes with she writes like she's sword fighting. It's just, it's all just bang, 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 bang. I plod more, I think, in my own writing.
I think you're a softer writer.
Mm.
I find her more aggressive than you.
Absolutely.
That is to me one of the main difference. She's much more raw.
Yes.
You're more refined and softer and smoother writer. So don't underestimate yourself. Those are wonderful things to have.
Well, that's a nice description. I would say I'm more timid than she is.
Well, maybe you've been pushed less.
She's certainly very, very forthcoming about her sexuality and so forth. But she's quite a force. Mary Oliver, good dear friend of mine who died maybe a year before Chris did. I'd lost some wonderful people. But when I was in Georgia, I would drive down to Florida to visit her, and she kept urging me to write back to Renata, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I've been wondering about that for for a long time, many months, if not years. And that's been something I've always wanted to ask you. And you should feel so privileged that she chose you to speak through, because that means you are the right channel. And so you're very special at that as well. So I congratulate you for being chosen.
Yeah, I do feel chosen. Thank you.
Millicent, I also have a question for you, and it has to do with how we first met. We first met through a poetry reading in San Francisco. Do you recall that? I went there with our friend Katarina. Do you remember that? And soon after, you started the Kale Soup for the Soul. And I would like you to talk a little bit more about Kale Soup for the Soul, about its importance to you and to those who have entered in dialogue with you through that process.
I remember most, you'd be crazy, Deolinda. I remember at an airport when I met when I was with Luis.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I remember we were chatting with that's my first memory. So I just throw that out there. The Kale Soup readings, I think we did about maybe 40 different events, including workshops and readings with at least 40 different Portuguese-American writers across the board, mostly from the Azores, but also from mainland. And we had in San Jose, we had a writer who's half Portuguese and half Saudi Arabian, and we had people from Madeira, and so it ended up being a lot more broad than just the Azores, not just that the Azores are just. But our first reading was in Chicago, and I think we had about 200 people in the audience, and we did a live stream, and we had people from Portugal tuning into it as well. And the Chicago Cultural Center sponsored us. It was just truly amazing. And that was all we were going to do, just like the one. And then we thought, well, we could do this again. And then so we started doing different readings at bookstores and at universities. And then as it spread, more and more people wanted to join in. And so we had small readings, maybe 3 people, and larger readings with 10. And I tried to mix it up between poetry and fiction, and also memoir and sections from novels. And it was just an amazing experience. I'm a little bit, just partially because of the pandemic, but partially because of the nature of a situation with travel. But the last one we did was in New Jersey, and Paula Nevish did that at an art gallery. So it was just an amazing, amazing experience, and I'd love to do more. Hopefully, when things sort out a little bit. But mostly for me, it was a sense of learning and getting to know other writers and other people in the community. Probably the best part was when we read in smaller communities. We did a Portuguese library in Cambridge, and it was like not literary people. It was like people from the community that brought like bags of apples to share at a potluck, and they were so like, perhaps it was the only reading they've ever been to. And those audiences I really loved reaching and getting to know those people, and they had stories and talking to them afterwards. And that out of that kind of grew the workshops at Rhode Island College, where we had college students and high school students who were either Portuguese or Brazilian, and they were studying Portuguese, and we did these amazing workshops with students. So it's mostly been just a building of a community and getting to know people and learning from them.
Yeah, they were wonderful events. So Lara, my question to you, I'm on, right? My question to you has to do with the title you chose for the kiss of, for your book title, The Kiss of the Bee, or Kissing the Bee, correct?
Right.
Kissing the Bee.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I liked it.
I do too, as you can tell. I love the visual, but
yeah.
it's dangerous to kiss a bee.
Well, there's a certain amount of risk in anything we do in life. So, I guess maybe that could be part of it. And I wrote a poem called Kissing the Bee, where the bee, actually, there was not much sting to the bee. There was no sting to the bee. It was rather pleasant and floral. And I like the title and the visual. So there you go. Nothing spectacular in meaning.
Well, maybe it is. Maybe it just shows the sweetness and the fulfillment of a little risk-taking. Writing poetry is risk-taking. In today's society, it is risk-taking. We're not in ancient Greece, where poets were considered, although they were also a little bit dangerous, considered a little bit dangerous in ancient Greece. We must not forget that. But I just kind of always saw that little bit of a metaphor there present for you, that it's writing poetry is a dangerous proposition. But thank God you took the danger. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's pass it to Duarte and see if he has any questions from online or whatever, or from himself.
Yeah, so I invite you still if you have questions. Because we only have 9 minutes left, I was thinking to a general question. Initially was thought for Millicent, this question, but let's do it general, because I think the poetic work of all of you kind of touched that. And my question is, let's start maybe with Millicent. Do you think that one of the goals of poetry, or if you want, mission of poetry even, should be the preservation of a memory? And when I'm talking about memory, I'm talking about historical, political, social. Should that be the goal of poetry, or one of your goals? And if yes, why? And if you can explain a little bit more. And I'm thinking this because, for instance, in Greek poetry, there was this dilemma between poetry should be truth, and I still think that's what it should be, but it also should be memory, I believe. I wanted to know what all of you think about poetry and the preservation of a memory, and maybe even going to the beginning of our conversation when you talk about your roots. if you can develop a little bit more. Millicent?
Poetry is truth, truth is poetry. I absolutely know that quote. I on the in the same vein as communication, I think that I have to, as a writer, I feel like poetry can change the world. And if it couldn't, I wouldn't be writing, you know? And I feel like the responsibility of poetry is to serve as a witness. And that includes, you know, recording the memories. And in fact, there's the premise that poetry is truer than historical nonfiction, which I really believe to be the case. And it's more true to capture a moment or a memory than it is to record what per se a scientific list of what happened. I think a subjective memory is absolutely more valid. And I think it's our responsibility as writers to serve as witnesses for past generations and to what's going on in the current world, whether it's going on in your own particular world or the world around you.
Thank you. I would ask Frank. I don't see Frank, but I believe he's still there. Frank, same question.
Yes, sorry, I got interrupted.
So my question is about the goals of poetry. If you think poetry should be the preservation of a memory, and for memory, I'm talking about historical, political, social memory. Do you agree, and why?
I do agree. I don't know if I can articulate why, because again, when I first started writing poems, that's just what happened. It was memory, it was racial memory, it was ethnic memory. There were no borders between those things. It was just sort of, I guess, writing from a deep place where there aren't other venues for that kind of utterance. I mean, poetry can say things in a way that we can't express otherwise. Sometimes good prose, certainly, but certainly not in conversation, and you know, not in. I think the privilege of imagery. I think the way we can manipulate syntax, the way we can drift from the quotidian, from the actual into another kind of utterance from another kind of place, is what makes poetry poetry. Mm-hmm. And I think it does things that, in my experience anyway, that no other form can do as much of or as well. Mm-hmm. That's a 10-page paper.
Sorry, it wasn't my intention. It wasn't my intention. It wasn't my intention, but
with footnotes.
With footnotes, yes, and long, extensive bibliography. And thank you for your answer. And I'm going to ask Lara as well the same question. Lara.
Okay, that is a huge question, I have to say. Really, it is. Memory is important. It's I can't, it's for me beyond writing about my heritage. In writing and putting landscape in there as well, because landscape informs some of that memory with my family and ancestors and where they came from and so forth. But in writing my book of poetry, Kissing the Bee, I really was informed personally, selfishly, not just putting it out there, of where I came from and who I am. I mean, it really put me in a very enriching place on that. And I love poetry for that, because you can connect with something and then you don't know what you're going to find. It's like a treasure hunt. My family came to seek gold and they found other treasures, is a good way to describe it. So thank you for the question, but I could talk to you on that for a while.
Another paper, right? Thank you for the question. We only have 3 minutes left, and before I pass the word to Deolinda for the closing remarks, I would like to thank you all, and also to invite you the two next events of the Center for Portuguese Studies. The next one is going to be on Wednesday at 10 a.m., 6 p.m. in Portugal. And it's going to be also about the poet, Ana Hatherly. It's the 5th annual conference of Ana Hatherly. We're going to have special guests talking about art, contemporary art production in Portugal. Next, this upcoming Wednesday. And also on May 5th, you're all invited. We're celebrating the Dia Mundial da Língua Portuguesa at 5:30 at our Portuguese Consulate and at our Center for Portuguese Studies. It's an event that will have music, and we'll have theater, we'll have poetry as well. So you're all invited, but let me just thank you all for your precious contribution and for this amazing conversation. And I'll pass the word to Deolinda.
So once again, I would like to reiterate, I would like to thank the participants for their generosity. And I would like to thank everyone who tuned in to be with us for this event. And I would like us to think forward to the day when we can get together and continue this discussion, and hopefully bring in one or two more people into the fold, and we can once again be together and celebrate Portuguese literature, because more than Portuguese-American literature, I feel your literature is beyond universal. Mm-hmm. And it is both Portuguese and American, not a slash between them, but an and between them. Mm-hmm. And as such, I look forward to that day and hope that we can all be together again soon. Thank you so much.